I really need to stop coming to you mid-snack.
Hello beautiful people, thank you so much for tuning in. Today we have the Beginner's Bible of Tin Whistle, and this is the Tin Whistle Terminology Dictionary. A quick disclaimer before I get into this, I have never had not even one single formal tin whistle lesson. I've never taken any lessons. I've learned to play this thing completely at home by myself, using the internet and learning to play by listening to stuff. So some of these might not be 100% accurate, but if you know any different, then do let us know down in the comments below. This is a learning channel and everybody is here to try and learn as much as we can about tin whistles. So without further ado, let's get started on tin whistle terminology. ABC notation. ABC notation is a shorthand form of musical score, and it uses letters, numbers, symbols even sometimes to indicate notes that you need to play and the rhythm in which you need to play those notes. Back pressure. It's basically described as the minimum airflow that you need to sustain a clean note on tin whistle. The design of the whistle kind of creates a feeling of pressure when you blow, and the more pressure there is, the less air that's required. So, for example, if you blow down a drain pipe, there is no back pressure, but if you blow down a straw, there is back pressure. So it's basically the amount of air that you have to use to make the whistle make a sound. But generally whistles with high back pressure, they use a smaller amount of air, whereas whistles with low back pressure need a lot of air. That's as far as I understand it. But do let me know in the comments on that one, because information on the internet is somewhat conflicting and confusing. Moving on. Bell note. The bell note is the lowest note that your whistle plays. So it is all 6 fingers down, the smallest amount of air, the lowest note your whistle plays. Blade and window basically is this sharpened, shaped surface right here, which kind of breaks the air stream when you blow into the whistle. Basically causes the air inside to vibrate and produce the sound. The blade is the little bit just here, and the window is obviously the little square that you see around it. Next we have block. The block is a piece of wood or plastic, or even metal sometimes, that fits inside the sort of mouthpiece of your whistle here to form the inner surface of the windway. So it's, as you can see on this one, we have a black block here, and it is literally just a shaped block that's inserted into the whistle mouthpiece. Bore, or body, is basically this long tube section. It's the main body or bulk of the whistle. Chiff. Now, chiff is basically the initial sound made by air leaving the mouth of a wind instrument. So it's kind of a little short-lived popping sound sometimes between the beginning of different notes. Chromatic. You'll hear chromatic and diatonic, so I'm going to put these two together. Tin whistles are diatonic instruments, and that's an instrument that can play a range of notes in a set key. So for example, it'll play D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and then C natural if we drift away from our usual fingering. Chromatic instruments play all the notes in between, so they play all the sharps and flats, and they also play all the whole notes as well. So that would be going up from D, D sharp, C, C sharp. So you'd have all the sharps and flats and all the main whole notes as well. Conical bore. Tin whistles come in different bore shapes, and as we learned, the bore is the main body of the whistle. A conical bore whistle sort of tapers towards the end, so it's wider here at the mouthpiece end, and it's narrower at the base. So it's sort of a cone shape, and it gets smaller as it goes down the whistle. Cross-fingering. Cross-fingering is where you place your fingers in different positions, different to how you'd usually place them, to get additional notes on your tin whistle. So for example, to play C natural on a D whistle, you need to remove the top finger but leave the second and third on. And that allows you to pick up additional notes that wouldn't generally be in the key that your tin whistle is in. Dual flute or double flute. A dual flute or a double flute is basically two flutes that are fixed together, and then you can play them at the same time. You can actually make your own versions of these if you have two whistles. You can just put them both in your mouth at the same time if you like. Drone flute. A drone flute is a very similar thing, but it's basically two whistles, and one of those whistles plays the drone underneath. So as you can see I did there. So you have one note that is sustained underneath, and then you have another whistle that plays the main melody. Here's an example of a drone flute. The term drone as well can also be used to basically mean the note that is sustained underneath the main melody you're playing. So if you chose to play a whistle in D, you could play a drone note as a D underneath, starting on D on your whistle, and then you'd play the melody on your tin whistle, and you'd have a long, sustained D note underneath that you could play along to. Embouchure. That is the shape of your mouth when you're playing the flute. So not so much when you're playing the whistle, you don't need to create a specific shape with your mouth, but when you play the flute, the side-blown concert flute, you do need a particular shape in order to direct the air correctly across the open hole where you blow into. So rather than blowing in like you do with a tin whistle, you blow across, so that embouchure is the shape that you create with your mouth to make a flute make noise. Fipple. Now Fipple actually relates to the entire mouthpiece of a recorder or a whistle or a similar end-blown instrument. It's anything with a thin channel cut through a block that directs the stream against the sharp edge. So the Fipple basically encompasses the entire mouthpiece on the top of your whistle. Half-holing, covering half the hole on your tin whistle in order to basically find those additional notes that aren't in your tin whistle key. So as we talked about chromatic and diatonic instruments earlier on, chromatic instruments have all those sharps and flats in between the whole notes. But you can actually achieve that on tin whistle, but you do need to play half holes. So I'll give you an example of how half holes look and sound. Now you've already heard me use the term key a few times in this video, and the key is basically the musical scale that the notes of your whistle are based on. So for example, this whistle is a D whistle, it's in the key of D, so it's based on the D major scale, and that means that you've got the notes D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and C sharp, and that is the notes that this whistle can play, and those are also the notes in the key of D major. Alternatively, you also have the term keys. And some whistles, namely cessato whistles, actually make keys that cover the holes on your whistle. And they do this on their low whistles to make the low whistle easier to play. And basically what this is a little pad that covers the holes for you to make the instrument easier to play. Low whistle. Now a low whistle is basically a larger whistle that plays notes that are lower than your traditional tin whistle or penny whistle. A variation of the traditional tin whistle, and it is distinguished by its lower pitch and its larger size. Mouthpiece. We've also covered this word a few times. Literally, it just means the bit of the whistle that you put into your mouth and blow into. Octave. Now, octaves are a little confusing because they do require a small amount of musical theory knowledge to understand. Basically, an octave is the 12 notes on a chromatic instrument that go from, for example, C to C, or in our case, D to D. So on tin whistle we play, on the D tin whistle we play D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and then we go back to D. So going from D to D is a whole octave. So when people refer to first octave, second octave, and even third octave on tin whistle, the first octave is basically what you can do with your 6 fingers blowing a very small amount. The second octave is the higher notes you can play with your 6 fingers again, going through another range of notes. And the third octave is not reached by very many people or very many whistles. So for example, first octave would be, second octave would be, and third octave would be. I could get 2 third octave notes on this whistle. one's pretty good going. Ornaments. I do have a whole video on ornaments, which I will link up here, you guys can check that out. Ornaments are embellishments of a melody. So it either means adding notes or by modifying rhythms. It gives a basic composition, just a little bit more character, makes it a little bit more pleasing. So I'm going to give you an example quickly of a few ornaments that you might hear the terms of and a quick explanation of what they are. A cut is where you play an extra note immediately before the main note in a tune. It's usually a note that's higher than the main note, and this additional note is played really quickly and it sounds almost like a stutter. So you'd play... A cran is played by playing a note and then repeating the note 2 or 3 times each time with a cut just before it. Now, I am not familiar with how to play crans. I'm just going to give you the description on this one. Some say that the 3 cuts kind of should vary, with the first cut being above the main note and the second cut being below the main note and the third being even lower, but you can hear a lot of Ilian pipe players playing crans, so yeah, do check those out. Next we have finger vibrato. Now you can add vibrato with your voice, with your vocals, with your body, your throat, your gut. I do have a video on that up here, do check it out. But alternatively and more traditionally, you can kind of waver your fingers over the remaining open holes, and that basically displaces the air and vibrates the sound of your notes a little. A roll or a long roll is played by quickly playing 5 notes in rapid succession. And basically we start with the main note, for example, a G, and then we follow that by a sort of a higher note, then we play the G again, and then we play a lower note. But we kind of cut or tap those higher and lower notes quickly. So for example, on a G roll, you'd play... So everything's really, really fast. But yeah, it's 5 notes. It's your main note, the note higher, your main note, the note lower, and then your main note again. For half rolls, basically you do that without playing the main note to start with. So you'd play, instead of G, A, G, F, G, you'd play A, G, F, G. Now a tap is basically the same as a cut, but it does have one little difference. And that is that the extra note is below rather than above the main note. So a cut on a G would be... Slides I have covered in my tin whistle ornaments video. Basically it just means sliding your finger from one note to the other to basically slide from one note to the other with your sound. Penny whistle. Now you may hear a selection of terms for this little instrument, anything from a flute, a Fipple flute, a flageolet, a penny whistle, a tin whistle. Basically it's any basic high-pitched 6-holed flute that you blow from the top. Piper's grip. Now the piper's grip, I also have a video on this, is the different way that you hold a low whistle in comparison to a high whistle. High whistles, you use your finger pads to cover the holes, and with low whistles, you actually use different parts of your fingers to cover the holes. So generally you use this part here, and then the finger pad of the third finger. So you cover it on an angle with different parts of your fingers. And the reason is that these whistles are longer and larger, but our hands don't change size, so we just need to use different parts of our hands to be able to play these whistles. Play by ear. Learn to play a tune by listening to the actual song or tune you're trying to play, and then repeating that back. So you memorize the tunes in your head without having to read any notes. You listen, you repeat, you play. Scales. Scales are basically playing up and down all the notes on your tin whistle in order. Scales. A session. Now a session is a social gathering of musicians and singers who basically perform music in a relatively informal context. There is a lot of session etiquette, so if you are planning to go to a session, make sure you go and listen first, go to a few. By all means take a whistle with you, but pretty much wait to be invited. As far as I can tell. There are some amazing videos on YouTube already about session etiquette, so do check those out. I've never been to one myself, so I'm not really qualified to give information on that, but basically, yeah, It's a gathering where people play music. You might hear the phrase a good session whistle or a good practice whistle. A good session whistle is generally quite loud with good volume, and a good practice whistle is basically a quieter whistle so you don't disturb the neighbours. Sheet or music score. This is the official musical notation that you'll see everybody in orchestras playing. It is the official notation of music. It's all these jazzy little notes and lines and things that I don't really... Well, I kind of do understand it, but I cannot read it at pace. I never will be able to, I already know that. But that is sheet music. Here it is, this is how it looks. Straight bore. Now we talked about bore earlier on, and we talked about conical bore. A straight bore whistle is literally a whistle that does not change width from the top to the bottom. So conical bore gets narrower, straight bore doesn't do anything at all, it stays the same width throughout. Tabs. Tin whistle tabs are what my channel is all about. They look like this. Basically, they are diagrams or images showing you literally where to place your fingers on the tin whistle to get the certain notes you need. They don't show any information on rhythm or timing. They just literally show you the notes. So they're basically something that's used for beginners and for those who can't read music for any reason, and a lot for people who play by ear and just want that little bit of reminder or ease of getting started. Trad. Now you may hear the word trad thrown around. It basically means traditional, and it's short for Irish traditional music, also known as Irish trad, Irish folk music. There are so many variants. Basically it's a genre of folk music that developed in Ireland. Trad players are generally people who like to play traditional Irish music, and they play it very well. They play in sessions, as we've mentioned, and non-trad players are musicians who don't focus or learn to play traditional Irish music in that style, but just play other styles and genres of music instead. Transverse. Now, as we mentioned with the concert flute or the Irish flute, transverse flute is a side-blown flute. So rather than blowing through the top of a whistle, an Irish flute or a transverse flute or a concert flute has an opening that you blow across and then you play out to the side. Tunable. A tunable tin whistle is basically a whistle that has some mechanism for shortening or lengthening the entire whistle, and that changes its pitch. So this whistle here is a Dixon tunable, and basically what that means is I can pull this right the way out here, and that basically makes the whistle make a different sound. So you can adjust the pitch of the whistle to suit other instruments that you might be playing with. The adjustment is very minimal, so it probably goes from a D maybe to a D flat or C sharp. But it does, the more you push it, the more it affects the quality of the notes that you play. And finally, voice. Now the voice refers to the unique characteristics of how your particular whistle sounds. And this varies between makes and brands and even the size and key of a whistle. So I'm going to take you through a few common phrases or terms that you'll hear which describe the sound a particular whistle makes. Breathy. Breathy whistles are softer, they have a sort of airy sound. You can basically hear the air and the breath in the notes that you play. Chirpy. Chirpy is referred to kind of like a bird sound, like a robin, loud and clear. Crisp. Crisp whistles tend to have this sort of loud, sharp. Sometimes you say a morning is crisp if it's cool and fresh. It's something that just has a little bit of an edge to it. Sharp. Now I just mentioned sharp. Tin whistles described as sharp can be a little bit shrill, perhaps a little bit piercing. It doesn't mean that they're sharp or flat, musical terms, but it just kind of means they're loud, again, cutting through, possibly a little bit, makes you go, whoo, a little bit piercing. Soft. Now, soft whistles are considered to be quieter, they're a little bit breathy. The sound coming from them is a little bit muffled or muted, so they're not as crisp and clear and cutting as other terms that we've encountered. Pure. Pure whistles are clean. They have a kind of hollow sound, so it's almost like ringing crystal. The sweet brass is one of the purest whistles I have, I think. Rich, smooth, deep, loud sound. It's a very resonant sound and a very sophisticated sound. It really, really sounds good. Rounded, sort of mellow, that's deep, that's rich, again, as we've said, a full sort of sound. So not thin and crispy, but really rounded, deep and resonant. Sweet, a characteristic of the sweetgrass. Sweet basically means clear, not overly loud. It's not shrill, it doesn't pierce your ears. It's sweet and soft, pleasant. Warm. Warm, again, is not as shrill, it's not as piercing, it's a little bit more mellow. Warm sounding whistles do tend to be a little bit more rounded, as we've just experienced, so quieter and pleasing on the ear than some of the sharp, shrill, piercing sounds. And finally, the word texture. Texture comes up a lot with voice. Texture is the grit, the gravel, the characteristics of the sound that the whistle makes. So sometimes if you do have a breathy whistle, that airy sound will be sort of referred to as texture in the voice. So that is my tin whistle dictionary. I know there are a few things I've missed out. If you can think of any more tin whistle terms that you think might be useful for beginners, then do leave them in the comments down below. Check me out on Ko-fi and Patreon if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out some of the other videos I mentioned, which I'll put up on screen here, and all the ones I mentioned on the eye. I'll try and link them in the description below as well. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy whistling. Bye.
But this smoothie bowl is really good. I might change this channel where I just eat stuff. Cutie Pie Eats! Who needs tin whistle when you have blended mango? See, now I need to finish this quickly to actually start the video. I feel like I'm rushing it rather than savouring it.